For corporate elites, debt is leverage, a calculated tool used to build wealth. But for the working class, it functions as an inescapable trap. This divide plays out on a hidden battlefield, the financial ledger. This wealth disparity is the result of a meticulously engineered system, designed to favor the creditor at every transaction boundary. Carrying unmanageable debt is rarely a personal moral failing. It is a structural mechanism designed over centuries to funnel human labor directly to the ruling class. To see how this architecture was built, we have to look back to the ancient Near East. Back then, money was physical survival: fields of grain, livestock, weighed silver. If a harvest failed and you exhausted those tangible assets, corporate bankruptcy didn't exist. You had only one liquid asset left to settle the ledger: your physical capacity to work. But ancient economies recognized that permanent servitude would destabilize the market. Original biblical law, codified in Exodus, placed a strict ceiling on these labor leases. A debtor worked a maximum of 6 years. On the 7th, the lease expired. Crucially, a worker could not be released empty-handed. The law mandated an exit payout, seed capital drawn from the master's grain floor and livestock. This ensured the freed individual had the liquid assets needed to establish independent economic viability. Human servitude in its original design was mathematically bounded. It was a temporary financial contract meant to balance a ledger, not an unchangeable biological condition. The American agricultural model required a completely different structure. To maximize profit, plantation owners needed a labor force that was permanent, intergenerational, and stripped of all legal recourse. The circulation of the complete biblical text posed a massive financial threat to this system. If enslaved workers read the ancient laws mandating a 6-year release and a capital payout, the justification for lifelong servitude would collapse. So in 1807, British imperial editors and West Indian planters created a highly specific artifact, the Slave Bible. The editors executed a mathematically precise project of censorship. They cut away roughly 90% of the Old Testament and half of the New Testament. They systematically deleted the entire Exodus narrative and all explicit laws governing financial resets and mandatory liberation. By erasing the workers' legal rights, the ruling class weaponized the text. They successfully transformed a bounded financial contract into a divinely justified system of permanent enslavement. Following the Civil War, the legal abolition of physical slavery threatened to freeze the intensive agricultural economy of the American South. The financial elite needed a new mechanism to capture labor without violating the Constitution. They found their mechanism directly within the new legal framework. This is the exact phrasing of the 13th Amendment. It outlaws involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime. State legislatures immediately capitalized on this exact phrasing. They passed black codes and vagrancy laws, making it a criminal offense for newly freed black citizens to be unemployed, to loiter, or to lack a state-approved labor contract. When individuals were arrested on these manufactured charges, local courts levied excessive cash fines that were mathematically impossible for them to pay. Looking at this historical photograph of men in striped convict uniforms, we see the physical reality of the solution. Because they couldn't pay the fines, the state leased these criminalized individuals to private corporations, mine operators, and plantations to work off their artificial debts under brutal conditions. The economic system successfully adapted. The mechanism of physical ownership was replaced by state-enforced criminalization, creating a closed loop that funneled free labor back into the hands of private capital. During the final months of the war, Union General William T. Sherman, pictured here, issued Special Field Orders No. 15. This policy allocated 40-acre tracts of confiscated coastal land to newly freed black families, providing them with essential, tangible capital. But shortly after assuming executive authority, President Andrew Johnson revoked the order. He mobilized the military to forcibly evict the thousands of families who had already cultivated their acreage, returning the land directly to pardoned Confederate planters. This ledger page tracks human beings as precise monetary assets, capturing the asymmetrical reality of emancipation. Under compensated emancipation acts, the federal government paid loyal slave owners up to $300 for every individual they lost. The oppressors received massive financial restitution. The millions who endured generations of uncompensated labor received zero capital. Denied land and baseline capital, newly liberated families were forced to farm the very same plantations on credit. As you can see in this composite image of a cotton harvest, the physical labor continued under a new framework, sharecropping. Landowners controlled the ledger, inflating the cost of seed and operational supplies to guarantee the tenant farmer finished every year in deficit. It was made a statutory crime to leave a plantation while carrying an unsettled balance. The financial ledger officially replaced the iron shackle, legally anchoring the worker to the soil through manufactured insolvency. This historical trajectory of debt trapping leads directly to the architecture of contemporary consumer banking. The underlying objective of the ruling economic class remains exactly the same today. Consider the modern payday lending storefront, like the one shown here. These institutions function as a modern iteration of sharecropping. They target uncapitalized consumers facing sudden economic disruptions, offering loans with annual percentage rates reaching 300 to 400%. It is a mathematical certainty that these rates cannot be cleared by a standard paycheck. To enforce compliance with this wealth extraction, the financial system relies on the credit score. This proprietary corporate metric measures an individual's historical profitability as a debtor rather than their overall financial health. The ledger actively penalizes anyone who tries to live entirely within their means. If you maintain a cash-only position and refuse consumer leverage, you receive a low or non-existent score. That makes it incredibly difficult to secure housing, obtain automotive transport, or pass a corporate employment screening. The modern financial apparatus deliberately weaponizes social stigma and structural barriers. It shames consumers into entering a compounding loop of liability, converting their daily schedule into a guaranteed cash flow asset for a major institution. The critical divergence between the economically literate and the financially enslaved comes down to posture. When a consumer uses high-interest credit to purchase a depreciating lifestyle item, they adopt a defensive posture. They are forced to trade 40 hours of their weekly life energy simply to service the principal and compounding interest. Conversely, corporate entities and sophisticated business owners operate from an offensive posture. They deploy debt strictly as leverage. If an enterprise borrows capital at a fixed rate of 6% and invests it into an operational asset that yields 15%, the asset neutralizes the debt automatically. The owner pockets the 9% difference without surrendering their personal hours to clear the ledger. The path toward economic independence requires the rejection of consumer shaming and a shift toward strategic asset control. You must look past the immediate gratification of lifestyle commodities and focus entirely on acquiring cash-flowing assets. Breaking from these historical cycles requires mastering the structural division between liability and asset. From the ancient grain silo to the modern bank ledger, the rule has remained unchanged. Never permit yourself to be transformed into a passive, yielding asset on someone else's balance sheet.